My father evacuated the family during a hurricane and left me behind. He boarded my window shut from outside. Mom cut the power. I sat in the dark with the pets. 7 years later, Grandma's will was read aloud. Dad went the color of wet cement. My father said 4 words through the plywood before he walked to the car. So you don't get ideas. He'd spent the previous 40 minutes loading 2 vehicles in the driveway, my mother moving between them with the particular efficient urgency of a woman who has organized household logistics her whole life and knows how to execute them under pressure. My brother's overnight bag, the photo albums from the hall shelf, the good silverware wrapped in dish towels. My grandmother's overnight kit, which my grandmother had not been consulted on and would not have approved of if she had been, because she would have wanted to know where I was. My grandmother was already in car 1 when my father went to the garage. I heard the drill from my bedroom. 3 seconds of high, thin sound, the specific pitch of a cordless drill driving a screw through plywood into a window frame, repeated 4 times, 4 screws. 1 for each corner of the board he'd cut to fit my bedroom window from the outside, which meant he had planned this in advance, which meant there was a piece of plywood somewhere that he had measured and cut and set aside before the storm was even a threat to landfall, which is the part I come back to most when I think about that night. He came to the door of my room after, not inside, just to the doorway. "Someone has to watch the house," he said. "You're 19. You can handle it." Then the words through the plywood when I didn't answer. 4 words, flat and final. "So you don't get ideas." He left. My mother took the last car. I watched from the kitchen window as the taillights of a 2009 Honda Odyssey went down Sycamore Lane and turned left. And then there were no more taillights. And there was no more noise except the sound the wind was starting to make in the pine trees at the edge of the property. A low, directional sound. Not yet frightening. Still in the range where you could convince yourself it was weather rather than something coming. The whiteboard on the kitchen wall said Car 1 and Car 2 in my mother's block letters, with the list of what went in each one. My name wasn't on either list. My mother had cut the main power to the house before she left. She'd done it, she told me through the kitchen window while I was still trying to understand that the cars were actually leaving, to protect the wiring from the surge, which was considerate, in the way that remembering to turn off the stove is considerate when you are leaving the building on fire. She had done it after my grandmother was in the car and couldn't argue, which is the detail I've spent 7 years thinking about most. I sat on the floor of the hallway closet with a yellow flashlight, 2 dogs, Barnaby and Fig, a lab mix and a beagle respectively, and a cat named Socks who was pressed against my left side and pretending very hard to be unafraid. The power was off. The plywood was over my window. The only light in the house was the flashlight my grandmother had given me a week earlier, which I had not yet needed, and which I was now holding with both hands against my knees. The roof had started to do something I can only describe as breathing, a slow, rhythmic flex and creak that I understood from what I'd been learning in the early weeks of my apprenticeship, to be within normal parameters for a wood frame structure in high winds, and which felt, in the dark closet, with the animals warm against me and the sound of the storm building outside, like the house was deciding whether to hold. I called my grandmother at 11:40 p.m. She picked up on the second ring, as she always did, because she had learned from 34 years of nursing that the second ring was when people thought you weren't coming and adjusted accordingly, and she had decided this was a habit worth keeping in retirement. "I know," she said. "Are you in an interior room? Closet? Animals with you?" "Yes." "Flashlight?" "Yours." A pause, just long enough to be a breath rather than a hesitation. "Good," she said. "Stay there. Call me when the sound changes." The sound changed twice. The first change was when the wind reached what the meteorologists later described as sustained Category 3 gusts at landfall, which felt, in a closet in a wood frame house on Sycamore Lane, like the house had stopped being a house and become something that was negotiating with the wind about its own continued existence. Barnaby put his head on my knee and stayed there. Fig had wedged himself behind me and was breathing in the shallow, rapid way of a dog who has decided that denial is an option. Socks was simply still, in the way that cats go still when stillness is the only available response to something they cannot control. The second change was when it stopped. Not gradually, the wind dropped to something manageable in about 20 minutes, the specific, almost eerie quiet that follows the worst of a major storm, when the air doesn't know what to do with itself after that much sustained movement. I stayed on the line with my grandmother for 4 hours in total. We did not talk constantly. There were long stretches where neither of us said anything, and we simply stayed connected across 84 miles of telephone infrastructure that had somehow remained functional, and the silence on the line was the specific, present silence of a person making sure you know they are there. At 3:22 a.m., she said, "I think the worst has passed." "Yes," I said. "Evelyn, yes. I need you to walk the house in 30 minutes and tell me what you find, carefully, 1 room at a time." I walked the house. I told her what I found. She listened and asked clarifying questions in the nurse's voice, specific, systematic, interested in the information rather than the emotion attached to it. The back porch, 2 boards, a gutter separated from the northeast corner, a pine tree down at the edge of the yard, far enough from the structure to be cosmetic rather than structural. No water intrusion in any of the rooms I could reach. No signs of foundation movement that I could identify. She listened to the full report and said, "The house is standing, and so are you." "Yes," I said. "Good," she said. "I'm going to stay on the line until sunrise. Get some water." I got some water. I sat back down in the closet with the dogs and the cat, and my grandmother stayed on the line, and we waited for the sun. When my family family came back 2 days later, my father walked through the house in the specific, proprietary manner of a man inspecting something he considers his property, regardless of whose name is on what document. He ran his hand along the baseboards. He checked the ceiling in 3 rooms. He opened and closed the door to the back porch. Then he said what he said. House looks good. You did fine. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry we left you. Not, I should not have done what I did. I should not have sealed your window. I should not have left you without power. House looks good. You did fine. The approval of a man for the property, used as a substitute for any acknowledgement of what it had cost the person who'd kept it standing. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't have required more energy than I had left after 48 hours alone in a house during a major storm. 3 months later, I left. I packed a toolbox, 3 leashes, and enough clothes to get through 2 weeks. And I moved into a studio apartment on the other side of the city with a pet-friendly policy and a kitchen faucet that had been dripping since approximately the Eisenhower administration. I fixed it on my first evening there, because I was training to be a plumber now, and this was a problem I had the tools to solve. I called my grandmother every Sunday. She answered on the second ring, every time, as though she had been keeping that Sunday hour clear, and we talked for an hour or more, and she asked specific questions about the work and about my life, and I answered them honestly in the way that felt possible with her and with almost nobody else. The first few years were the years of building something. I finished my apprenticeship, I got my license. I started taking jobs on my own, small at first, then less small, the way any practice builds when the work is reliable and the word gets around. I was not thinking about the storm. I was not thinking about it either. It was simply part of the structure of what I knew about my family, filed alongside the other things I knew. My father's posture at the head of any table, my mother's composure under pressure, my brother's perpetual mild absence from any situation that required something difficult of him. I did not know about the notebook. I did not know about the insurance claim. I did not know about Marshall Raines or Dr. Caroline Whitmore or the process my grandmother had quietly built in the 15 minutes after dinner every evening for 7 years while I thought she was just writing ordinary things. Nobody told me. She had decided, for reasons she explained in the notebook, that telling me would do more damage than the silence, that what she was building was for later, and that later had its own timing, and that the most useful thing she could do for me in the present was answer on the second ring on Sundays and ask specific questions about my work. So she did that, and she built that, simultaneously, for 7 years. I found out about 53 missed calls and an insurance claim on a Tuesday morning in October at a gas station, parked on the side of the road at 8:17 a.m. That's when the 2 timelines converged. She was 75 that September, a retired nurse who had spent 34 years in the same regional hospital doing the same meticulous work of keeping people alive and recording everything she did with the precision of someone who understood that the chart is the argument, and the argument has to hold up. She was 5'2" with a posture that made her seem taller, and she had the specific, attentive quality of a woman who looks at you with the kind of full attention that most people reserve for things they are paid to pay attention to. She was the only person in my family who looked at me like I was worth the attention. She had given me the flashlight a week before the storm. Not a dramatic presentation. She'd just handed it to me in the kitchen one afternoon while we were doing dishes together and said I should keep it in my room. "We have a generator," I said. "The generator belongs to your father," she said. In the flat, informational tone she used for facts she was not interested in debating. She had signed my plumbing apprenticeship forms when my father refused, which he had on the grounds that plumbing was not a career for someone with my aptitude, which is a sentence that requires context to understand fully. He meant that he hadn't chosen it for me, and therefore it wasn't appropriate. My grandmother had driven me to the apprenticeship office herself on a Tuesday morning in her tan Buick LeSabre and signed the forms with her neat left-handed script while the coordinator explained the program, and my father's name appeared nowhere in the conversation. She kept a leather notebook in her apron pocket. She wrote in it every evening at the kitchen table in the 15 minutes after dinner was cleared and before she went to watch the news. I had seen her do this hundreds of times. I had never asked what she wrote. I know now. I survived the storm. That is the plain statement of what happened. The house at 114 Sycamore Lane survived it too, more or less. The back porch lost 2 boards, one of the gutters separated, and a pine tree came down across the northeast corner of the yard, but the structure held. I had stayed in the closet for the worst of it and moved carefully through the house during the quieter periods, checking for water intrusion and structural damage the way I'd learned in the first weeks of my apprenticeship, with a flashlight and my hands along the baseboards and my attention on the sounds the building was making. When my family came back 2 days later, my father walked through the house. He ran his hand along the baseboards the way I'd done, and he looked at the walls and the ceiling and the doors and the windows, and he said what he said. "House looks good. You did fine." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I should not have done what I did. I should not have left you. I should not have cut the power. I should not have screwed the window shut so you couldn't leave. House looks good. You did fine." The performance of approval for the house, as a substitute for any acknowledgement of what it had cost the person who'd protected it. 3 months later, I left. I packed a toolbox, 3 leashes, and enough clothes to get through a week, and I found a studio apartment with a pet-friendly policy and a leaky kitchen faucet that I fixed on my first evening there, because I was a plumber now, and leaky faucets were something I could address. I called my grandmother every Sunday. We talked for an hour, sometimes more. She asked about the work, specific questions about what I was doing and what I was learning, thing, asked in the way of someone who has retained a genuine interest in technical things from a lifetime of technical work. She never asked about my father. I never brought him up. 7 years later, I was driving to a job site when my phone started going and didn't stop. I pulled over at a gas station at 8:17 a.m. and looked at the screen. 53 missed calls, 11 voicemails, texts from numbers I didn't recognize alongside texts from my mother, my brother, and 2 different family members I hadn't spoken to since the storm. The text from my mother said, "Call me immediately." Then, "Evelyn, I'm serious." Then, "This is very serious. Please call." I called my grandmother's number first. She picked up on the second ring. "It's going to be okay," she said before I could speak. "What's happening?" "An insurance settlement. I need you to request the claim form from your father's insurer. I'll explain everything, but I need you to have the document first." I was 26 years old, a licensed plumber 3 years into running my own small operation, parked at a gas station at 8:17 in the morning with 53 missed calls, and my grandmother's calm voice telling me everything was going to be okay in the tone she used when something significant was happening, and she had decided not to alarm me unnecessarily. I requested the claim form that afternoon. The document arrived 3 days later, forwarded to me by the insurance company's records department. It was a hurricane damage claim filed against the property at 114 Sycamore Lane, which my father's family had lived in, rent-free, for 13 years, a detail I had known but not examined, dated 7 weeks after the storm. The claim was for $47,000. Property damage, interior and exterior, with an itemized schedule attached. The claimant was Glenn R. Whitfield. There was a witness attestation on the filing. The witness signature read, "Evelyn Grace Whitfield." My name, my handwriting, approximately. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. I turned the document on my desk and studied the signature the way you study a thing you need to understand before you can decide what to do with it. The signature was close enough that someone who didn't know my handwriting well might have accepted it, close enough that I could see the effort that had gone into making it, not close enough if you looked carefully at the angle of the capital letters and the way I formed the terminal stroke on the G to have been written by me. Someone had practiced my signature, had practiced it and not quite gotten there. I called my grandmother. "I know," she said, before I'd said anything except hello. "Marshall already has it." Marshall Raines had practiced estate and family law in the same downtown office for 28 years. The office was on the second floor above a barber shop, up a staircase with a brass handrail worn smooth on the inside from a quarter-century of hands. He had wire-rimmed glasses that he adjusted when he was making a point, the specific adjustment of a man who has learned that his listeners pay more attention when his glasses move. He opened a manila envelope on his desk, thick enough to use as a doorstop, and told me that my grandmother had first come to see him about 8 weeks after the storm. "She brought fig preserves," he said. "I should note that your grandmother never brought gifts unless she was about to ask me for something complicated." Ruth had changed her will. The house at 114 Sycamore Lane, which was her house titled in her name, which my father's family had occupied for 13 years under an informal arrangement that had never been legally formalized into any kind of permanent ownership, went, in its entirety, to me. "She also brought me a copy of the insurance claim," Marshall said. He adjusted his glasses. "She'd obtained it through a public records request. The witness signature does not match the known exemplars of your handwriting that she provided. She'd kept your letters, cards, notes over the years, the way people keep things." He set a small stack of papers on the desk. "The discrepancy is apparent to any trained examiner. It would also be apparent to the relevant authorities if someone were to bring it to their attention." "Why didn't she?" I asked. "Why didn't she report it when she found it?" Marshall was quiet for a moment. "She said that if she went after Glenn at that point, your mother would respond by restricting access. She'd lose her relationship with both your mother and you." He looked at me steadily. "She said, not yet. She said the time for it would come, and that when it came, it needed to be airtight." He opened a second folder. "A forensic document examiner's report from a firm called Whitmore Analysis Group, based in Atlanta, 22 years specializing in questioned document examination. Dr. Caroline Whitmore had examined the signature in question against 17 known exemplars of my handwriting and had issued a finding with 94% confidence. The signature on insurance claim 4471B was not produced by Evelyn Grace Whitfield. The file went back 7 years. My grandmother had been building it for 7 years. Entry by entry, in that leather notebook she kept in her apron pocket. In the evenings after dinner while I thought she was writing ordinary things. She died in March. Pneumonia, which she had developed in late January, and which she had not told me about until it was already serious, which was consistent with everything I knew about how she managed information she was afraid would cause me to worry before I was equipped to do anything useful about the worry. She died in St. Catherine's Medical Center, in the same building where she had worked for 34 years, in a room on the 4th floor, with a nurse named Adaize Nwosu, who had been one of her students 20 years earlier, and who held her hand on the night she died. I got there in time to say what I needed to say. I will not tell you what those things were, because they belong to the two of us, and to no one else. I will tell you that she was calm, and that she was herself, and that the last thing she said to me, which she said with the flat, informational certainty she used for facts she was not interested in debating, was, "The notebook is finished." Her leather notebook was on the nightstand when I got to her house. I opened it that night for the first time. Blue-black ink, left-handed slant. The precision of a woman who had spent 34 years recording patient vitals in the margins of seconds, for whom the difference between what happened and what was recorded was not a philosophical question, but a professional and sometimes legal one. September 15th. Glenn boarded Evelyn's window from outside. I could not stop it. I was already in the car. September 15th. 11:40 p.m. Evelyn called. She was in the closet. She was calm. I was not. October 3rd. Glenn filed insurance claim 4471B. Evelyn listed as witness. $47,000. October 8th. Signature is not Evelyn's. Obtained claim form through public records. Will send to Marshall tomorrow. October 14th. New will signed. Marshall filed. Property at 114 Sycamore Lane. Evelyn Grace Whitfield. There were entries for every subsequent development she could document. The letters she'd gathered as handwriting exemplars. The date she'd retained Whitmore Analysis Group. The date the forensic report came back. A note, dated 2 years after the storm, that simply read, Glenn bought a boat, $23,000. He told Diane it was from savings. Below it, his savings account balance in September was $4,100. I know because I co-signed on it in 2003 and never had my name removed. The final entry was 3 weeks before she died. I am tired, but the notebook is finished. I did not do this out of anger. I did it because someone should have been counting. Nobody was, so I counted. I sat with the notebook in my hands for a long time. The reading was on a Monday morning in April in Marshall's conference room, which seated 6 comfortably and 8 with some adjustment. Marshall had arranged 8 chairs. My father arrived in a new sport coat, the kind that fits the way clothes fit when you have recently lost weight and replaced things without quite updating your sense of your own size. With his shoes polished and both hands flat on the table when he sat down, the posture of a man who does not understand the room he's in but intends to be the center of it regardless. My mother sat beside him, compact and composed, wearing the expression she wears in situations she's classified as manageable. My brother had driven separately and arrived 3 minutes late and spent the first 10 minutes looking at his phone. I sat across from them. Marshall sat at the head. He read through the standard portions of the will with the methodical patience of a man who has learned that people only hear the parts that directly affect them, and who reads all of it anyway because the parts they don't hear are often the ones that matter. Household items distributed as per attached list. Personal effects as annotated in a separate document he'd prepared with Ruth. The Buick LeSabre, which she left to Edes Nwosu, the nurse who had been with her when she died, because, as the will stated, she had been with her at the end, and that deserved more than a card. When he reached the property section, the air in the room changed, not the temperature. The air itself, the quality of attention in it, the way 5 people simultaneously stopped doing what they were doing with their bodies and waited. I, Ruth Elaine Calloway, do hereby bequeath the real property at 114 Sycamore Lane, including all structures thereon, to my granddaughter, solely and entirely, Evelyn Grace Whitfield. My father's chair scraped against the floor. He was standing before the scrape had finished. She was confused. She was 80. Her mental capacity was certified in writing 3 days prior to the signing of this document, Marshall said, without raising his voice, by Dr. Thomas Abernethy, her physician of 14 years. The certification is Exhibit A. He placed a copy on the table without looking up. She was entirely competent. The will is valid. My father sat back down, slowly, like a man who has been told that the floor will hold him but is not entirely confident. There is also a letter, Marshall said, which your grandmother left with instructions that it be read aloud at this proceeding. He unfolded a single page, the same ink, the same left-handed slant. He read it in full. I will give it to you in full, because it deserves to be given in full. On September 15th, my son-in-law Glenn left my granddaughter alone in this house during a Category 4 hurricane. He boarded her bedroom window shut from the outside with 4 screws, so that she could not open it from within. My daughter Diane drove the last car and did not object. Evelyn was 19 years old. She sat in a hallway closet with 3 animals and a flashlight I had given her 7 days earlier, while the roof shook and the power was cut, and she held on. When Glenn returned 2 days later, his first words to his daughter were about the condition of the house, not about her. I gave Evelyn this house because a family that leaves a child in a storm does not deserve the shelter that child protected. This house has been in my family for 41 years. It is now hers. I ask that no one in this room dispute this, because if you do, you will need to explain why she was alone in it while you were not. I loved my daughter. I love my grandchildren. I did not always know how to protect them. This is one thing I was able to do. I did it. My mother's hand had come up over her mouth sometime during the reading. It stayed there. My father's face had gone the color of wet cement. Not gray exactly, more the specific pallor of a man whose blood has withdrawn from his surface. The look of a body managing something the face isn't ready to express. He was looking at the table. Marshall opened a second folder. There is also the matter of insurance claim 4471B, he said. Claim number 4471B, filed with Meridian Property Insurance on October 3rd, 7 weeks after the storm. The claim was for $47,000 in hurricane damage to the property at 114 Sycamore Lane. The claimant was Glenn R. Whitfield. The witness attestation bears the name Evelyn Grace Whitfield. He placed a copy of the forensic report on the table. Dr. Caroline Whitmore, Whitmore Analysis Group, Atlanta, Georgia. 22 years in question document examination. 14 pages of findings, appendices, and comparative analysis. Conclusion: the signature on the witness attestation is not produced by Evelyn Grace Whitfield. Confidence level, 94%. The question of what was done with the insurance settlement, Marshall said, is one that that the relevant authorities are now positioned to examine. My office has submitted the forensic report and supporting documentation to the State Insurance Commissioner's Fraud Division and to the County District Attorney's Office as of last Friday. The silence in the room was the particular silence of a space where a very large amount of information has just arrived and no one has yet found the words on the other side of it. I reached into my coat pocket. I placed the house key on the table. I placed it carefully, without drama, on the walnut surface between my folder and my father's. Connecticut statute requires 30 days notice for occupants of a property following transfer of title. I said, "That's the legal notice period. I'm giving it to you now." My father looked at the key. He looked at me. The man who had sealed my window with 4 screws from the outside so I couldn't get ideas, who had driven away in the second car while a hurricane was building off the coast, who had said house looks good, you did fine 2 days later and thought that was sufficient. This man was sitting in a room his mother-in-law had spent 7 years building against him, one careful, meticulous blue-black entry at a time, and he was looking at a key I'd placed on the table, and he didn't have a word for it. He didn't have a word for any of it. There are things that have happened since the Monday in April that are part of the public record, and things that are not, and I will stay on the right side of that line. The insurance fraud referral is active. The District Attorney's Office confirmed receipt of the documentation. The State Insurance Commissioner's Fraud Division assigned a case number. Marshall Raines has been involved in that process in a limited advisory capacity, and Dr. Caroline Whitmore has been identified as an available expert witness if the matter proceeds to formal charges. The $47,000 plus the question of the boat purchased 2 years after the storm with funds of unclear origin is a matter under active review by people whose job it is to review such things. My family vacated 114 Sycamore Lane 28 days after the reading. I know because I drove past on day 29 and the driveway was empty. I am not living in the house yet. I have the key. I have the title, which transferred through probate with the straightforward efficiency of a well-prepared estate and an airtight document. I go to the house sometimes on Sundays, the way I used to call my grandmother on Sundays, and I walk through the rooms she lived in for 41 years, and I think about what it takes to be patient for 7 years, to build something entry by entry in a leather notebook in the 15 minutes after dinner, to understand that not yet is sometimes the most powerful thing you can say. The notebook is in my apartment. I keep it on the table beside my bed, not because I read it regularly, but because it is the most important object I have been given, and the most important place for an object like that is somewhere you see it every day. My grandmother was a nurse for 34 years. She understood that the chart is the argument, and that the argument has to hold up, and that the work of building an airtight case is slow and particular and requires you to write down things you wish you weren't watching and to keep writing them even when nothing is happening yet and it seems like nothing will ever happen yet. She understood that precision is not the same as coldness, and that documentation is not the same as distance, and that the act of bearing witness carefully, completely over time is one of the most loving things a person can do. She said she did not do it out of anger. I believe her. I have read the notebook many times now, and there is no anger in it. There is precision. There is love of a particular disciplined kind. There is the voice of a woman who had spent her entire professional life making sure the record was accurate and had applied that same discipline to the most important record she ever kept. Someone should have been counting. Nobody was, so I counted.